The morning of October 11, 2025, began like any other in Santa Monica. The ocean breeze was calm. Sunlight spilled gently through the sycamore trees. And the world still believed that Diane Keaton, the eccentric queen of Hollywood, was living her quiet days surrounded by books, laughter, and her loyal dog, Reggie. But at 8:08 a.m., a chilling call shattered the calm. Person down. When emergency responders arrived at Keaton's private residence, they were led through a silent hallway lined with photographs, snapshots of a lifetime that once defined American cinema. At the end of that hallway lay Diane, motionless, in the very room where she used to read scripts and write in her journal. The official report said, no sign of disturbance, no evidence of struggle. Her desk lamp was still on. A teacup, half finished, stood beside an open notebook filled with her familiar handwriting. On the last page, a single unfinished sentence read, "There's still time to," and then the ink trailed off. Paramedics pronounced her unresponsive. Hours later, the news broke across every network. Actress and director Diane Keaton has passed away at age 79 due to bacterial pneumonia. Yet something didn't fit. Friends claimed she hadn't been hospitalized recently. Her assistant said she had been losing weight rapidly. Neighbors hadn't seen her walking Reggie in weeks. And then came the most unsettling detail: the 911 call had been delayed. Those who knew Diane best described her as endlessly cautious about her health. She had survived skin cancer, managed an eating disorder, and always kept routine medical checkups. To them, the story of sudden pneumonia sounded too neat, too convenient. In the days following her death, whispers spread through Hollywood. Why did her family delay announcing it until October 16? 5 days later? Why was she cremated so quickly, leaving no chance for a detailed autopsy? Her closest friends revealed she had been withdrawing from public life since early 2025. After the California wildfires forced her to sell her beloved Beverly Hills home, she moved to a quiet property in Palm Springs with her 2 adopted children, Dexter and Duke, both adults now. Both rarely seen publicly. But since that move, Diane's social circle had shrunk dramatically. Calls went unanswered. Visitors were turned away. She's resting, Dexter would say. Mom just needs privacy. Privacy, or isolation? By September, friends noticed that even her usually lively Instagram account had gone dark. No posts, no photos, just silence. It was as if Diane Keaton, one of the most recognizable women in film, had vanished long before her body was found. When the coroner's report cited bacterial pneumonia, the public accepted it at face value. But those who loved her couldn't. There were too many unanswered questions, too many loose threads. Why did her health collapse so suddenly? Why were her children the only ones with access to her in her final days? And why, within mere hours of her death, did they rush to her lawyers' offices in Los Angeles to discuss her will? The story of Diane Keaton's death had begun as a simple obituary. But in the quiet spaces between the facts, in that unexplained delay, in that silent house, another story was beginning to form. A darker one. Just 5 days after Diane Keaton's death, while Hollywood was still mourning the loss of its quirky icon, her family made headlines for a very different reason. On October 16, 2025, both of Diane's adopted children, Dexter and Duke, were seen entering 2 separate law firms in Los Angeles. Their expressions were not of grief, but of calculation. Witnesses described their demeanor as businesslike, not mournful. Within hours, it became clear. The 2 siblings had initiated a legal scramble for Diane Keaton's $100 million estate. To the outside world, Dexter and Duke had always been the perfect symbols of Diane's later life happiness. She had adopted Dexter in 1996, at age 50, and Duke 5 years later. Diane once said in an interview, "I didn't need to be married to know love. My children gave me everything I'd been missing." But love, it seemed, would not survive the weight of her fortune. Dexter, now 29, had followed in her mother's creative footsteps. She became an interior designer and proudly carried Diane's aesthetic into her own work. She argued that she deserved ownership of the Brentwood home, the most valuable piece in the estate, worth between $25 and $30 million. "That house is part of me," she told her lawyers. "I helped her build it, room by room, Brick by brick, the Brentwood property wasn't just real estate to her, it was an emotional inheritance. Duke, at 25, had chosen a different path, the fast, ambitious world of tech startups. To him, the most important assets were the cash holdings, royalties, and investment shares, totaling $40 to $50 million. He produced old emails and text messages where Diane had encouraged his entrepreneurial dreams. "You'll build something of your own, Duke. That's my biggest wish." He took those words as validation, a promise that her wealth would fund his vision. The once close siblings now stood on opposite sides of a courtroom, each convinced they were the true heir to their mother's legacy. And as if that wasn't enough, two new players entered the war, Diane's biological sisters, Dory and Robin Hall. Dory, a retired actress in her 70s, claimed that Diane had promised her financial support in her later years. Robin, the quieter of the two, insisted she deserved a share of royalties from Diane's books, especially Brother and Sister, which mentioned their family history. They demanded to see Diane's 2015 will, last updated in March 2025, mere months before her death. According to insiders, that document named Dexter and Duke as primary heirs, but it was vague about how assets should be divided. Some sources said Diane intended Dexter to receive her real estate, while Duke inherited her financial investments. But since the distribution was not clearly specified, both siblings began to twist Diane's words to their advantage. Family meetings quickly descended into chaos. Witnesses described shouting, tears, and near physical fights. "It was heartbreaking," said one attorney's assistant. "They weren't talking about memories, only numbers." At one point, Dexter accused Duke of trying to manipulate Diane in her final months, persuading her to change parts of her will when she was too weak to understand. Duke, in turn, accused Dexter of being a control freak obsessed with houses and image. And the sisters? They fanned the flames. Dory demanded compensation for years of family loyalty, while Robin wanted proof that none of Diane's charitable donations, particularly to the LA Conservancy and animal shelters, had been used to reduce their potential inheritance. In public, the family maintained silence, but behind closed doors, lawyers exchanged emails daily. Property appraisers visited Diane's homes, and her name, once synonymous with artistry and independence, became the centerpiece of a bitter legal drama. A friend of Diane's summed it up with quiet sadness. She spent her life making homes beautiful and people happy. Now those she loved most are tearing it all apart. The world had lost a star. But in the shadow of her death, a far uglier story was unfolding, one of greed, suspicion, and betrayal. As lawyers fought over who would inherit what, the scope of Diane Keaton's fortune began to emerge in shocking detail. Her estate, valued at nearly $100 million, wasn't just the product of movie stardom, it was the culmination of 5 decades of relentless creativity, discipline, and business acumen. But now, every dollar, every house, and every memory had become ammunition in a war she never wanted. At least 60% of Diane's wealth came from her lifelong passion, real estate restoration. In Hollywood, she wasn't just known as the star of Annie Hall, she was celebrated as the queen of architectural revival. From the late 1980s onward, she bought neglected Spanish colonial, Mission revival, and mid-century modern homes across California, restoring them with obsessive precision. She flipped dozens of properties, turning derelict structures into architectural masterpieces. Her Brentwood mansion, estimated between $25 and $30 million, was her crown jewel. She personally designed it, filling it with reclaimed tiles, rustic oak, and hundreds of black and white photographs she had taken herself. It was the home she once said she would never leave until the day I die. And yet, in March 2025, Diane sold it, quickly, quietly, and without explanation. For her friends, that sale was the first red flag. It didn't make sense. One recalled, she adored that house. Selling it was like tearing out part of her soul. The timing was even stranger. It coincided with her increasing withdrawal from public life, her cancelled appearances, and her move to Palm Springs, a retreat she once described as temporary. Had she planned this move herself? Or had someone else convinced her it was necessary? The rest of her assets were equally complex. Diane's film royalties alone generated millions annually, from timeless titles like The Godfather, Reds, Father of the Bride, and Something's Gotta Give. Her 3 best-selling memoirs, Then Again, 2011, Let's Just Say It Wasn't Pretty, 2015, and Brother and Sister, 2020, continued to sell globally, adding steady income from publishing deals and speaking engagements. And yet, despite her immense fortune, Diane's final months were marked by unusual financial moves, selling property, closing accounts, and transferring funds into private trusts whose full details remain sealed. Reporters began asking uncomfortable questions. Why the sudden liquidations? Why did she choose to isolate herself in Palm Springs with only Dexter and Duke for company? And most importantly, who truly benefited from these last-minute financial shifts? The official explanation, that she sold her homes due to declining health and a desire for simplicity, sounded convenient but hollow. Diane was never one to retreat from life. Even in her 70s, she was designing homes, writing books, giving interviews, laughing about aging. To simply fade into silence was entirely out of character. Medical experts agreed that bacterial pneumonia can indeed strike the elderly without warning. But they also noted that Diane's sudden weight loss, prolonged fatigue, and delayed medical attention suggested a longer, more complex decline, one that could have been prevented with proper care. So why wasn't it? Her family's secrecy didn't help. The cremation was performed within 48 hours, and no independent autopsy was ordered. When journalists asked for clarity, the family declined to comment. Online forums exploded with speculation. Was Diane neglected in her final weeks? Were her children hiding something? Soon, conspiracy theories spread like wildfire. That Diane's illness had been exacerbated intentionally. That she had been isolated and manipulated in her weakened state. And that her quiet death was not as natural as it seemed. No one could prove any of it. But for the fans who had loved her authenticity, her laughter, her refusal to conform, the silence surrounding her death felt deafening. Somewhere between the official narrative and the whispered suspicions, one truth became clear. Diane Keaton's final years were far lonelier and far more controlled than anyone had realized. And if those suspicions were true, that her end was not simply the result of illness but of human greed, then this was not just a tragedy. It was a betrayal.